Let's talk about the betrayal aspect of Norwegian Offspring. That is the part that is closest to real life, aside from the ideology. It is fictionalized, but still, it has a lot of truth to it, because that happened. The betrayal. It wasn't my mother who was worst. She was actually the only one who didn't cooperate with the police. And that was because she was on a vacation, I think, in Spain at the time, so she didn't have the chance to, so she wasn't actually tested on it. But everybody else, and my father was worst, everybody else betrayed me and cooperated with law enforcement, took their side, told them anything they knew that could help the police when I was a political prisoner in 2012. Now in the movie, it is the mother of the character Stein who has moved to Denmark after they became estranged due to a similar betrayal. And it was actually an even worse betrayal, because in the movie the mother is actually not just cooperating with law enforcement, she's actually reporting him to law enforcement. So it's an even worse betrayal. Since in my case, they didn't start the case, they just, when it was going on and they were called as witnesses for interrogation, they talked anything they could think of, even though they of course had the right to remain silent, as nobody is forced to testify against close relatives. And they were informed of their right to shut up, but they didn't want to do that. They wanted to say anything they could think of they could help the police. No human can live with that. It is an act of cutting all ties. And so that's what happened, obviously. So the estrangement part with everyone but my mother, in my case, in the movie it's the mother who is shown as being the villain who betrayed him the most, and then he does not talk to her for the rest of her life until she dies in Copenhagen, and then he comes to Copenhagen, and that's where the plot takes place, including a funeral. So I want to talk about that betrayal, because it is something really dark, really dark. I made a video titled "The Ninth Circle of Hell" to help me process it, because ordinary language does not suffice. You have to resort to poetry. The poetry of Dante. The Ninth Circle of Hell is a description that does justice to what happened. To what happens if that happens to you. How are you gonna feel? If you're in army, you probably just dismiss that as nothing, because you can't imagine that happening to you. You probably think I'm a psycho who deserves it, and you literally can't imagine what it would be like if that happened to you. Now, two things about that. Firstly, it doesn't happen to others. I know of no case in criminal history where the entire family has betrayed an accused man, an accused person, and cooperated with law enforcement. I don't know anybody that has happened to. But let's suppose if it happens, the way to think of it is, you have to imagine that it happens as you are persecuted for your most deeply held principles, because that's what happened. And you have to imagine, like, if you can't imagine being a sexualist, if you can't imagine taking sexuality's side against persecution, well, then imagine being a climate activist or something, right? Or somebody like Nelson Mandela. In his case, the methods he supported were completely comparable to mine. There's no moral difference there. The only difference is the kind of values. And I'm the kind of person that the normies will hate, while Nelson Mandela is someone who is politically correct that they can support. But you have to realize one thing. There is no difference between how deeply I hold my morality and how deeply somebody like Nelson Mandela would hold his principles, his morality, his activism, right? So if you're going to imagine this betrayal, you have to imagine somebody like him or somebody like you, given that you're persecuted for your most deeply held moral convictions, if you have any. Because that's what happened. And imagine your family then automatically just taking the side of law enforcement. And remember, they're not in any kind of way associated with the case. They're just witnesses, right? That's the use they can be to the cops to sell anything they can about how bad I am. Anything they can think of, they can give the cops an edge in prosecuting me. It didn't help them. I mean, it could maybe... They thought they were pursuing a lead for a couple of days, maybe a week, and then that fell apart because there was nothing in their testimony that could help them. But the betrayal is forever. So think about that. If you want to help the cops, you make a life-changing decision that puts you in the ninth circle of hell for life, relative to the person that you have betrayed. And at the same time, you think you're going to be this knight in shining armor to help the cops and the state and society against this evil man. That's what you think. But it doesn't work out that way. Your testimony is probably useless anyway. So think about that, or if you pondering betraying somebody you think deserves persecution for his opinions. Think about the consequences. Norwegian Offspring shows those consequences, and that's a part of the movie that's faithful to life, because that is the consequence. What happens to the relationship with his mother there, that is what would happen if you betray somebody like that. It is unforgivable. You can't live like that. Nobody can. It cuts to what it means to be a person. Because my activism is honest. It is my morality. It's who I am. If you think you can explain that away and think I can be forced into submission via punishment and violence, then you're not only wrong, but you're discounting my ability to be a moral person, to take moral responsibility for my actions. And even more sinister, I mean, the most sinister level in this is that if they had this idea in their heads that deep down, if I just got past what they thought was mental disturbance or something, I can end up being on the same side as them. And then they may have thought that betraying me wasn't really a betrayal, because deep down we are on the same side. And that is so evil. Because it assumes I'm not morally serious about my activism, that there's no real conflict here. It doesn't treat me as a person with moral convictions. I'm here to tell you that sexualism versus feminism is a real conflict. The world is not this cozy place where you are right and everybody else is sick if they disagree. And they can be beat into submission, and we're deep down, we're on the same side. We are not on the same side. We are on opposite sides of a war. And if you can't even acknowledge that this is a real conflict, then obviously our ties are cut for life. We are not part of the same community. And this is not even required. This level of conflict isn't required for such a betrayal to have that effect. Because nobody can live with a supposed family member not being loyal to them, right? And helping the cops, no matter what it is, even if it's a real criminal case and not this bullshit political persecution for making what turned out to be completely legal speech. Even if it's a real criminal we're dealing with in your family, and you betray them and talk to the cops, then that is a betrayal that will have this effect. So it's good that it's being visualized here in more places than Dante's Inferno. So that is one aspect of Norwegian Offspring that is serious and real.